The one thing that July 22nd highlighted, I hope, for people living in southern Wisconsin is the power of water.
We got our first report of a car floating in water, and it is southbound 45, but I missed the cross street. Just as you were introducing me, they talked about it, so it's happening. No, not your fault, it's happening.
Well, that's true flash flood, by the way, guys. It's cars floating in the water.
Holy cow. You guys are right, 43 is stopped, both directions at Good Hope Road. Traffic is not getting through, it's a river. Now, there is another place on 43 that is absolutely stopped, and that's Capitol Drive. It's impassable, so traffic is now being diverted off at the Capitol off-ramp.
We ended up with a series of strong to severe thunderstorms that developed along a warm front that had moved into the area during the nighttime hours overnight of the morning of July 22nd. And the storms fired up along a boundary that really didn't move all that fast. It sort of stalled over southern Wisconsin, and the storms formed along the boundary moving east. And they produced severe weather. We had tornadoes, 10 in all. We had hail, we had wind reports, but obviously the biggest impact on our largest metropolitan area was the heavy rain that hit mainly northern portions of Milwaukee County, but it was much more widespread than that. A good portion of Waukesha, Washington, Dodge, Ozaukee, as well as Milwaukee County saw tremendous amounts of rain in a short period of time. And we had flash flooding, and it caused a lot of trouble for a lot of folks.
And there was actually a pretty big event a week before the July 22nd, and that actually put something in my head because there had been flooding over I-43, eventually where I ended up reporting live from a week before. And so we were pretty saturated, meaning the soil had nowhere to take the water. So everything that was going to come down would be almost all runoff. So anything that was happening when you rain that hard, it's got to go somewhere. And in essence, it wasn't going into the soil, so it was either going on the streets, into the rivers, etc.
We anticipated severe weather that day. The Storm Prediction Center had us in a tornado watch. When we work severe weather here, there usually is a mode or a type of convection or severe weather that we're anticipating, either hail and or wind or tornadoes. And because of the boundary laying out across southern Wisconsin, one of the larger threats to the area with any storms that formed was going to be storms that produced tornadoes. So the watch went out for tornadic activity. But when we're working severe weather, we watch for all the potential threat elements that could occur. And while we anticipate tornadoes as being a major problem that day, we also worried about the wind and the hail that go along with strong to severe thunderstorms, and we look for heavy rain potential.
We certainly anticipated heavy rain. I've never seen a computer model spit out 7 or 8 inches of rain in a 2-hour period of time, however. It's just one of those things. It's an anomaly. It's one of those rare events. When I was in college at Western Illinois, one particular event that stands out, there was a place that was 20 miles west of our campus, Carthage, Illinois. They got 11 inches of rain in 2 hours. And nowhere else around them did. It was a one lone thunderstorm right overhead. So those kind of things happened. Are they forecastable? If that is a word, no. We will forecast the possibility of flooding. There was a flash flood watch out, and we were waiting and figured maybe 2-3 inches of rain, and that would have been enough to create some flash flooding. But on the north side, some places 7-8 inches of rain in a very short period of time, and we've seen the consequences. It was crazy.
Late afternoon in the summer is when we reach peak heating. And even though we had a lot of debris cloud, we had early thunderstorms that day, it still allowed the atmosphere to warm up. On top of that, because of the way the system was moving in, it allowed a prolonged period through the daylight hours of advecting more moisture and warmth up from the south.
Dew points were in the 70s, the measure of how much moisture is in the air. Anytime you're in the 70s, you walk outside and you immediately feel it. I mean, it's the insta-sweat as you go outside. It feels like you're on the Gulf Coast. And in essence, that's where our weather was from, our air was from. The Gulf of Mexico made it all the way into Wisconsin. Not unusual. We don't get too many days, though, with the dew points in the 70s. So we had the moisture there, but there had to be a trigger. Well, it was sunny for a fair amount of the day. And then there was a warm front that was sitting just to the south of us. This is what I call a quasi-warm front. It was really almost a stationary front. It edged just a little bit farther to the north into southern Wisconsin, just at the right time that these thunderstorms started triggering, which is what will happen late afternoon. You get the heat of the day, you get your air to rise, and you'll get these thunderstorms bubbling up. And that's what we had. And on top of that, then we had this boundary, this front that kind of sat itself right over southern Wisconsin.
The boundary itself was starting to sag slowly southward, but it was very slow. So even though the individual cells were moving anywhere from 30 to 50 miles an hour, the boundary didn't move very far. It was slowly moving to the south, and the storms kept forming along the boundary and moving east. And that is a phenomenon that we call training thunderstorms.
So it hit this boundary again and again with constant flow of moisture right on the same area. So one thunderstorm would go up and it would move, not very quickly, but it would move, it would go through, but no sooner did that happen, there was another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. That's training, where it's just looks like when you're watching radar, you look at the cells all lining up one after another, after another, after another, and if that hits the same area, like it did in northern Milwaukee County, that's when you get these monumental totals of rain. I wish we could forecast that. It'd be great, but I don't see that possible. Certainly not for probably many years to come. We'll know that there's going to be heavy rain. I cannot ever imagine a scenario when I'm going to put a forecast out of more than 5 inches of rain, because it's just that unusual.
So we were not only looking at the obvious severe threat of tornado, wind, and hail, but an ever-growing threat of heavy rain. And that became a very large focus for our severe weather operations that afternoon and evening. This is a loop of the thunderstorms that occurred on the afternoon and evening of July 22nd. It runs from about 3:30 in the afternoon, when the initial cluster of thunderstorms that caused the flooding began, and runs until midnight. We were still under severe weather threat all the way through till midnight. And as you could see, there was subsequent development to the west with the cells themselves moving east, but the actual line that the thunderstorms formed on was moving very slowly to the south. And you could see how that initial cluster that formed up over Dodge, Columbia, and portions of Fond du Lac, and even into Sheboygan County, sort of congealed over Dodge, Washington, and then northern Waukesha and Milwaukee County, southern Ozaukee. There's the line there. And it will pause here at 6 o'clock. And that's when the heaviest rains were hitting northern Milwaukee County. And you can see how the main elements of that particular cluster moved offshore but were replaced by others. So again, that's why we did not get as much rain down in the southern part of the county as we did in the north, but they did have flooding. There was still 4 or 5 inches of rain in southern Milwaukee County, but they didn't get the 7 and the 8. The other thing to note are the little line segments and individual cells that formed away from the main line that caused the flooding. But you could see from Madison and Point South, there were individual cells and short line clusters that developed, and then a main line that came through later on in the evening. And again, that provided not only severe weather, some of those individual cells were responsible for the tornadoes, but that second line also created 3 to 5 inches of rain. And those 3 to 5 inches of rain caused some flooding problems elsewhere in southern Wisconsin, though again, not nearly as bad as what was up in northern Milwaukee County. Important that day, as any severe weather day, was the information we were receiving from the outside. Our radar, our model data, the satellite can only see so much. And it's very important to us in any severe weather event that we get ground truth, that what we're seeing on the radar is being supported by what's actually happening. And there are limitations to the radar. So one of the most important aspects that we have in a severe weather event is getting information from trained spotters, from police and fire officials, from emergency managers, and from the media. All the TV stations in our area have their own spotters, their own people who report in temperatures and rainfall amounts on a daily basis. But when there's severe weather, they give their stations information. The stations have their crews, news crews, out in the street, out in the weather, and bringing information back to the TV stations. We have a chat capability, an internet chat capability with the local media, as well as emergency managers and surrounding offices, weather service offices, so that we can share this information.
A couple of years ago, the National Weather Service implemented kind of an instant messaging system through all the media partners, emergency managers, Skywarn, weather spotters. And it's a great thing because we kind of get in the heads of what the Weather Service is doing. A lot of times they'll give a little hint that they're thinking about issuing a warning, so then we're kind of on our guard. And what we're able to do is we get a lot more spotter reports than they do now, via Facebook, Twitter, et cetera. And so that all pours in. We relate that to them as well. So it's kind of a partnership that works quite nicely. So they get more information than they ever had before. We get a little more from them than we ever had before. So on big events, it's really helpful.
And at the height of the rain, as it was coming into northern Milwaukee County, we received a chat from John Milan that said he had almost 7 inches of rain in about an hour's time. And that was even exceeding the estimated hourly rainfall totals we were getting on our radar. So we knew not only that the radar was correct, but it was probably underestimating the amount of rain.
I'm not a huge guy that says, well, this is a 1 in 100 year flood, or 1 in 500 year flood, or 1 in 1,000 year flood. The problem with that is it happened in Milwaukee County. Milwaukee County is highly populated. Milwaukee County wasn't always highly populated. So 100 years ago, the same amount of rain does much different things than it does now. We have a ton of concrete around. Rain doesn't go anywhere in concrete. It flows off of it immediately. So that makes a huge difference. Is this unprecedented? No. Will it happen again? Certainly. It was the question of where that heavy rain happened in a short period of time and just an absolute deluge. I would say it's probably, that kind of event to happen again is probably maybe 1 in every 50 years. That's, a guess. And maybe 1 in 100 years. But it'll happen again. I think within our lifetimes we'll see another event like that. Will it be in those exact areas? Probably not. But it could be over southern Milwaukee County this time. Whereas the airport had a lot of rain, but it didn't compare. I think they had 4.5 inches of rain. But on the north side, I think it was 7.5 to 8 inches of rain.
This is a graph of the river gauge on Oak Creek at South Milwaukee. This first peak was from the earlier in the day rain, and it trended back down to around 4 feet. And then when the late afternoon evening rain came in, it jumped up to hit major stage of 11.25, and the record stage for that particular gauge point is 11.5 feet. So it almost hit a record, and then did a slow trail back down below flood stage. But it went basically from benign to major flood stage in the course of about 2 hours. GFS is with precipitation for tomorrow afternoon. The lift is still back off to the west. It would be hard for Milwaukee to get rain before noon tomorrow. Or snow. We judge events in terms of probability. And for flooding events, you hear this is once in 100-year flooding, once in 10-year flooding. It's just mainly a probability that flooding of this type would only happen once every 100 years, very rare. This was definitely a once in 100-year event. It hasn't been 100 years since the last time because if folks remember back in 1986 in August, it was the greatest one-day total rainfall measured at the airport, and County Stadium went underwater.
It was a little bit different area that got the rain in '86, though. It was a little bit farther to the south, and so the Pigsville area, which is just north of the stadium, that's right by Miller Valley, that whole area, notorious for flooding for many, many years. There's been a huge amount of flood mitigation since then. It doesn't flood nearly as much, and I don't believe it's flooded. Those neighborhoods used to flood all the time. That has not happened. They learned a lot, but Miller Park was flooded a couple years ago and did a huge amount of damage. People didn't see it. It was in the lower levels. It never got into the stadium itself, but it did get into all the offices that were on the lowest level, and they had to do a massive amount of work there. Then they built a berm for 2010, and they got it completed just in time before the July 22nd event. The water made it up to 1 foot from going above the berm, but the berm held and it kept the stadium dry.
And that was in 1986, so obviously we haven't gone 100 years since that last event. But that is just to give an idea of how rare an event it is. If you did it statistically, it would only occur in a given spot once every 100 years. And we just missed setting or tying the record for the greatest amount only because the rainfall at Mitchell Field was not quite as heavy as it was on the northern part of the city. So the record, the official site, did not get as much rain as it did to the north. Otherwise, we would have set a new record. So a very rare occurrence, especially for the metro Milwaukee area.
Move to the closest substantial shelter and protect yourself from flying debris.
The one thing that's forgotten that day, there were 10 tornadoes in southeastern Wisconsin. That normally would be huge in and of itself. Clearly, it was overshadowed because we had one of the worst flooding events that we've ever had in Milwaukee. And so that, and unless, I mean, we're fortunate none of those tornadoes did significant amount of damage. They all seemed to hit in very rural areas, and for the most part, they were fairly weak tornadoes. But 10 tornadoes in our area is one of the biggest outbreaks in history.
And we had a total of 10 tornadoes that occurred with thunderstorm cells that weren't necessarily associated with the flooding. They developed away from where that main line of thunderstorms that caused the flooding developed up toward the northeast portion of our county warning area. But there were 10 tornadoes that occurred. We had one EF2, we had 2 EF1s, and then the rest were EF0s. They were short track, they weren't on the ground very long, but they were visible to the observers. We got, again, a lot of good reports, a lot of visual reports, and some video subsequently came into the office of some of the tornadoes and the associated cloud formations from the storms that day.
Oh, that's a lot of mixing.
The one thing about severe weather is it's very dependent on the actual conditions at the time it develops. And while the model data and our experience recognizes patterns and shows elements coming together to produce severe weather, there's always that unknown of exactly when will it trigger, when will everything come together. We can anticipate sort of a time frame where we expect it to occur, but exactly where and exactly what form it will take sort of evolves during the event. So when I walked into work, my responsibility that day as the lead forecaster was to take what we call the public desk. It's the, generally speaking, it creates the forecast that you hear every day. Tonight, partly cloudy, temperature, wind. And also to be the flood person when it came to the severe weather parameters. If the Storm Prediction Center put out a watch for our area, it was my responsibility to put out the updated product that we use that details exactly what counties are affected by that watch. So when I came in, I was relieving another lead forecaster, Steve Davis, And he had already put out the first flash flood watch. And we were talking about how things were developing, that this line had developed and it was moving very slowly to the south, but with cell after cell developing along it. So he gave me the first indication that time that we were going to have the potential for a flooding event.
We were in the process of trying to find another meteorologist. I was, after working, I think 10 days in a row, I was looking forward to a day off. Strangely enough, you would find me on the golf course when it's a day off. That's where I was. Then the tornado watch was issued. There was already a flash flood watch in effect, but you wait until things start to really bubble up before you get too worried. Tornado watch was issued. Thunderstorms started popping pretty quickly. I got a call on the golf course, quickly got home, changed clothes, called the station. I was going to actually meet, because I was not going to come into the studio itself. I was going to try to be a reporter out in the field, which I don't do very often. Being the chief here, normally they want you to be in, but I try to talk them out of that sometimes. I actually like to be out in it and report from what's going on. But they told me to come all the way in, so I came all the way in. But already at that time, we had two of our other meteorologists were also here, so they were covering it. I have complete control, complete trust in what they're doing, and so I hopped in a news car with one of our reporters, and we started going up to the north. We were going to go try to catch the tornado warning that was ongoing in Ozaukee County.
In the meantime, the other forecasters who were involved in the severe weather operations that day were already issuing severe weather warnings and tornado warnings for the cells that had developed elsewhere. So there were really multiple areas within the forecast area that needed to be monitored for differing types of weather.
Going up, of course, I-43 at that time was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was slow, and the rain was just starting. And I was looking at radar on my iPhone, because everybody should look at radar on their iPhones, and noticing that, wow, these things are really lining up. So I tell my photojournalist, Bob Palmer, I'm like, you know what? Just a week ago, this area down here flooded pretty bad. I said, let's just chill out here. I said, we're never going to make it up north to Ozaukee County. Nothing was going on. It wasn't that impressive anyway. There was never a tornado sighted. So we get on Port Washington Road at Silver Spring, go south over by the La Quinta there, and we're just sitting on the road, and as this rain is coming down, and we were there for a very short period of time, and already Port Washington Road is closed. The water is a good 4 to 5 feet on Port Washington Road.
So I turned my attention to the flooding, and there were a couple of us that were keeping an eye on it. And it was obvious that the cells, even though they were moving to the east rapidly, were developing along that boundary. And the boundary was just moving ever so slowly to the south. And it became apparent that we were going to be issuing more flash flood warnings for a larger area, and it was going to involve the metro Milwaukee area during rush hour.
The interesting thing was logistics, trying to find a way to get back. All the roads are closed, or a huge number of roads are closed. So we took Lakeshore Drive all the way back down, and that got you slowly, very slowly. From where we were, it took an hour and a half to get back to our downtown location. And then I came on the air here. I was wearing a suit while I was out there, and that was a bad move. My tie was red that I was wearing. I had a white shirt on. That white shirt was pink because the tie had bled all into the shirt. So thankfully I always have a change of clothes here. Changed, started going on the air, gave Jeremy Nelson a break, and he'd been going on the air for about 5 hours. So then I pretty much took over and did the rest of the night. And still talked about more, because we still had thunderstorms ongoing and more tornado warnings ongoing, more severe thunderstorm warnings ongoing. It was about an 8-hour event. It was just one of those nights, or one of those days and nights that you'll never forget. As a meteorologist, though, I mean, I don't want to see anybody get hurt. I don't want to see the destruction. That's terrible. But as a meteorologist, to see an event like this, it's fascinating. I mean, it's what you really grew up wanting to see, wanting to do. And so in that respect, it's exciting. Again, the pictures of the devastation, no, I mean, you'd rather that happen somewhere else, but it's reality.
We have a flooding program where the phrase "turn around, don't drown" is a key element to try to highlight the point that even what looks to be an innocent amount of water washing over a road, and it isn't that deep, I can get across. People will not maybe fully understand the threat. It only takes 8 inches of water moving somewhere between 25 or 30 miles an hour, which really doesn't look that bad, to actually push a car off a roadway into a stream.
You want to try to avoid, especially moving water. The power of moving water is remarkable. A small car can get swept up in 1 foot of moving water. So many people are killed. More people are killed by flash flooding than any other weather event that we have in the United States.
And it's a killer. And we hope that people understand that flooding is something to be taken seriously and to avoid flooded areas and keep themselves safe.
So it is something that we need to take seriously. It does happen here. The streets of Shorewood, that's when you see literally a torrent where a flood is 3 or 4 feet of water rushing through like rapids. Thankfully, nobody was driving in that because it would have been really ugly. But you just have to take it seriously. I know everybody's always in a hurry to get where they need to go. Wait it out. The good thing about flash flooding is it doesn't last long.
This water has nowhere to go. To give you an idea how severe this is, I've just been over at the TV4 studios helping with John on the air. Here at the TV station, it has been raining now for about 30 minutes. We have picked up 3.4 inches of rain in 30 minutes. That's almost 7 inches per hour.